Welcome to the Space Telescope Public Lecture Series. Tonight's talk, Spacefarers, How Humans Will Settle the Moon, Mars, and Beyond. I'm Dr. Frank Summers, your host for this evening, and I want to thank our wonderful tech team, Thomas Marufu and Grant Justice, who are taking this and streaming it out to you for you to watch. I will note that we will be online only until further notice, and that will probably last throughout 2021. There really hasn't been any decision on this yet. We know we will stay online through the summer. We'll see about the fall. Our upcoming talks. Next month, we have a very special one for you. On May 4th, Finding the Music of the Spheres, Hearing Stars. This is from the Consonance Collective and the Bergamo Quartet from the Peabody Institute here in Baltimore. They have collaborated with the Space Telescope Science Institute to write music inspired by astronomical images. They will talk about their compositions as well as play some music for you. Now, I want to warn you, this one is probably going to go long. We have several different composers and several different pieces to play, so we're probably going to go for about 2 hours next month. Normally we stop at 90 minutes, but I think we're probably going to go for about 2 hours. But this will be a special event, and I'm sure you'll want to see it. In June, we will have a talk about exoplanets by Emily Rickman here at the Space Telescope Science Institute. And in July, Quinn Hart, who did this talk last year, Armchair Astrophysics, is going to come back with a second version of Armchair Astrophysics. It will not be the same things that she talked about last year. She said she had so much she could have talked about last year that she's going to do a follow-on to her talk last year. If you want to know about our upcoming talks, you can go to our website, www.stsci.edu/public-lectures will get you there. And on our page, you can see on the left-hand side the links to our webcasts, both on the our YouTube playlist, as well as the webcast archive housed by the Space Telescope Science Institute. On the right, you can see how to subscribe to our lecture announcements if you want just 1 or 2 emails a month reminding you of these presentations. Also, we have the upcoming lectures, the things, and if you click those read more buttons, you will get to the complete details about the lecture, the description of it, as well as after it has been recorded, the link to the STSCI webcast that you can see at the top, and the link to the YouTube webcast there on the bottom. Email. Well, as I've already said, sign up at the website. Very easy to do, but you can also subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Hubble Space Telescope. And if you're watching this on YouTube, hey, that's the channel you're watching. If you subscribe, then you will get new video notices and reminders of these live events. Finally, if you have comments or questions, you can send them to the email publiclecture@stsci.edu. Space Telescope Science Institute runs several social media channels for the Hubble Space Telescope, for the James Webb Space Telescope that will be launching this fall, and for the Space Telescope Science Institute itself. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on YouTube, we're on Instagram at the handles provided there. Myself, I do a tiny bit of social media on Facebook and Twitter as Dr. Frank Summers. And now the news from the universe for April 2021. Our first story, the dim prospects of a bright star. So let's start in this region of the sky. Now, as you can see in the lower right, I've circled the constellation of Orion. And that's a very famous constellation that sort of orients you on the sky. And Orion is the hunter. And he is accompanied by his 2 hunting dogs, Canis Major and Canis Minor. Canis Major is the big dog. And the dog star, the brightest star in Canis Major, is Sirius. Now, many of you may know that that is the brightest star on the night sky. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's the brightest star anywhere. It happens to be a pretty bright star, but it also is really, really, really close. That's why it appears bright to us. A really, really bright star, one of the brightest stars in the Milky Way, is just to the left. And it's circled and it's called VY Canis Majoris. All right. And so let's tell you a little bit about VY Canis Majoris. It's a red hypergiant star. It's huge. This is an evolved star, okay? It's 300,000 times more luminous than our sun. Yeah, much, much, much brighter than our sun. It's also much, much, much bigger than our sun. It's 1,400 times larger than our sun. How big is that? Well, that is so large that on this scale diagram, the sun has been there the entire time and you haven't noticed it. That's how tiny the sun is. Let me zoom in and you can see here's the sun compared to VY Canis Majoris. Yes, VY Canis Majoris is one of the biggest and one of the brightest stars out there. So it's an interesting star just in its own right, but it's also interesting in its light curve, okay? This is a historical light curve. It goes all the way back to 1800 and all the way up to 2020. So as you've got over 200 years of light curve here. And you'll notice that the plots are a little shifted. Well, that's because one of them measures visual magnitude, one of them measures blue magnitude, and one of them measures V-band magnitude. And they're slightly different, but they have to be shifted around to match, okay? But what you can see that is since the early 1800s through to today, VY Canis Majoris has dimmed a lot, okay? It's dimmed by a couple magnitudes. And also you can see that it's very variable, that it brightens and then it dims, and it brightens and then it dims. All right, so it's got this history of this. All right, and previous studies have figured out that this history is due to ejections of material. That VY Canis Majoris, this star in its older age, is spewing out material, and those clouds of material can sometimes get in our way and block the light and dim it. So what they wanted to do was study those ejections in detail. And so who are you going to call? You're going to call Hubble. And so looking in deep and close at VY Canis Majoris, Hubble was able to get this image of it. Now, there's all sorts of stuff around it. This is material that has been spewed out of VY Canis Majoris. And some people don't quite know where the star is, so I'll point it out to you. It's that bright white dot there, okay? And so the researchers then took spectra along lines of sight around the star to examine some of these ejected knots and filaments and clouds and structures. And they could measure the velocity of those clouds and then figure out when they had been ejected. So something that I didn't mention when I showed you that light curve is that they're figuring out when these ejections happened from the spectra and then going back to the light curve and figuring out, this is when this knot was ejected from the star. They're going back and they're doing the forensics of eruptions that happened, 30 years ago or 70 years ago, or even 150 years ago. They're actually being able to measure, all right, this clump of gas was ejected during this, this variation in the light curve. And that's really kind of cool, that you can go back after the fact and take a look at the historical light curve and match it to the physical structures that you're seeing in the clouds around it. So we're able to go in really close, take a look at VY Canis Majoris, but I got to tell you, you don't actually see the star itself. You see all the stuff around it, but as in the middle image here, you can see all we see of the star itself is this big white blob. So to give people an idea of what you might see, we had one of our wonderful artists do an illustration, which is what you see on the right-hand side here, of an illustration of the VY Canis Majoris, this red hypergiant star with all sorts of activity that's billowing things and will continue to do so, at least for another few million years until it either goes supernova or it collapses to a black hole. So the future is quite interesting for VY Canis Majoris, and we'll continue to watch it and see all of its amazing eruptions. The second story we have for you is double quasars in merging galaxies. All right, so let's unpack that. First of all, we've got galaxies, right? This is one of the famous galaxies, Galaxy's Messier 100. It's a beautiful spiral galaxy. And in the cores of all large galaxies, we believe there exist supermassive black holes, okay? So giant black holes that are millions to billions to, times the mass of our sun live in the cores of galaxies. And if material falls into these supermassive black holes, well, then stuff gets spewed out at really high energies. And if you see that spew from that supermassive black hole, you might see something called a quasar, right? And quasar originally meant quasi-stellar radio source. We've actually changed it recently to be QSO, quasi-stellar object, which is really what it is. It looks like a star, but it's not. Look, you can see the diffraction spikes here on this quasar, right? But it's in another galaxy. It's really, really far away. It's not a star. It's something that just looks as bright as a star, but it's really, really far away. How do we know these are in galaxies? Well, for some QSOs, we can actually find the galaxy itself behind it. So here you can see that little diffraction spikes there, that bright point in the center of this spiral galaxy, but you can also, by looking in the infrared, see the spiral arms of that galaxy. That's actually kind of rare. Usually you cannot see the galaxy behind it, but in some cases are. So we confirmed that these quasars exist in distant galaxies. All right, that's part one. Part two is we also know that galaxies merge together. This is an image of the two merging galaxies called ESO 148. Two galaxies that come smashing together and swirling up. And so the cores of these galaxies are now mixing together. So shouldn't it follow that if there's a quasar in a galaxy and a quasar in another galaxy, and those two galaxies merge together, that you could find a double quasar in merging galaxies? So those are really, really, really difficult to find, okay? So they designed this amazing search strategy. First of all, they found quasars. The Sloan survey has a list of quasars, and they found the very distant ones, what are called the high redshift ones, greater than redshift of 2. So you get really distant. That way that the emission from the galaxies behind them is actually minimal. So you'll only see the two bright dots, right? Then these two quasars are so close together that the Gaia satellite would think of them as just one object. But these two quasars are variable in their light and they would not be synchronized. So actually the center that Gaia measures would actually shift around a little bit. So you look for Gaia, you take the positions where the quasars are in Sloan, you look for variability in the Gaia position due to these quasars' variability, and then you say, there you have your candidates. They ended up with 15 candidates, and 4 were observed by Hubble. They found 2 sets of double quasars. This is really cool. Those are 2 bright quasar spots that Gaia would look at and see just one thing, but Hubble can resolve and see it as 2 quasars. And the supposition here, it hasn't been proven yet, is that these are in merging galaxies, because how else are you going to get 2 quasars in real close? We've never seen galaxies that have multiple quasars, a single galaxy that forms multiple quasars. So the idea is that these would be merging galaxies, and we'll see the quasars in the core as the galaxies are getting together. But here, this is also kind of unsatisfying, because all you get to see are the bright quasar dots. It was chosen so that the galaxy's emission would actually be minimal. So we take that idea of emerging galaxies and ESO 148, and we combine it with the 2 bright dots, and we did the calculations on how far apart would the galaxy bright dots be at this distance when it's scaled to this galaxy and everything. And an illustrator came up with this, our double quasars illustration. Okay, so it gives you the idea of these two merging galaxies long, long ago, and the two quasars in the center. In truth, it's not quite what the eye would, what any telescope would see, because the quasars would actually be a lot brighter. They'd blow out most of the galaxy. But it's an illustration to kind of guide your eye, put it in your head that these are two quasars in merging galaxies, probably about 9 or 10 billion light years away. Now we go to our featured speaker tonight. Let me stop my screen share. Our featured speaker tonight is Christopher Wanjek, and he is a health and science writer based in Baltimore. He holds a master's degree in health from Harvard School of Public Health and a bachelor's degree in journalism from Temple University. So journalism, health, man, that's perfect for the health and science writer. He's written more than 500 newspaper, magazine, and website articles for all sorts of famous periodicals. And from 1998 to 2007, he was even a senior writer at the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. He is the author of 3 books, and the one he's going to tell you about tonight, Spacefarers, has received critical acclaim. And he tells me he got one reviewer to say, I don't know how much he paid him, but he got this one reviewer to say, the best book on space exploration since Isaac Asimov. Whoa, that's a pretty good comment. I always ask my speakers for one interesting tidbit of what they do in their spare time when they're not doing their job. And Christopher says he likes to hang out behind the Space Telescope Science Institute building. Not because the building is there, because he's a forager. He looks for mushrooms and other wild things out there. And the park behind the Institute obviously is a good place. Who knew? So, ladies and gentlemen, Christopher Wanjek.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Frank. Let me get my presentation up. Okay. All right. Is that showing, Frank? I'll take that as a yes.
Looks
okay.
good.
And I'm not muted. All right. So, hey, thank you. Absolutely. Thank you. This is wonderful, to think of myself giving a talk at the Space Science Lecture Hall, however remote and virtual. It's a humbling experience. I mean, I've been an audience member so many times myself, listening to the greats like John Mather, Alan Stern, Mario Livio, Adam Rees, great science communicators like Ray Villard and Hannah Wakefield. So for me to be included in this lecture series is really an honor. So thank you for everyone inviting me. I have to say also I'm a little intimidated. I know this is a public lecture, but I know members of this particular public are real space aficionados, wearers of Star Trek paraphernalia. So, I know a lot of you know astronomy and engineering better than I do. In fact, I don't doubt there are people in the audience that I actually came to interview for my book, Spacefarers. But I hope I can impart to you my perspective as a health writer, and also as someone I would describe as an optimistic skeptic about living in space. So let me move on. And I know we're supposed to get our financial disclosures out of the way there, because I might be talking up Mars a little later. I'm going to start on Mount Everest. And I do that because, we can reach the top of Mount Everest with relative ease now. About, more than 4,000 people have been to the top compared to only 400 people in space. And despite this relative ease of getting to the summit, despite the fantastic view, no one's living, no one chooses to live on top of Mount Everest. It's not practical, right? I mean, what are you going to do for a living? How are you going to raise your kids? Air's kind of thin. It sounds obvious, but when we talk about living on the moon forever, and moving and migrating to Mars, how practical is that, despite the gorgeous view from there? What would be the economic and the emotional motivations to get us there? This will be a migration like never before. I would imagine that most of this audience tonight is in the United States, and think about yourself here. Either you or someone in your family came here to the United States for economic or emotional motivations, maybe religious motivations a couple hundred years ago. And they didn't come here just because someone invented a boat, right? And likewise, we're not going to go to Mars just because someone invents a rocket. Now, that said, I do think we're going to be on the moon in a scenario that looks like this in about 10 or 15 years with science bases absolutely happening. We're going to be on Mars maybe in 20, 25 years with a simple scenario like this. Will we be living in orbit in these rotating habitats with artificial gravity and climate control? Maybe. I can think of some emotional and economic reasons for doing this kind of thing, and I'll get to that later in the talk. Here's how we're going to get there. We're going to drive. I joke, of course, but this is a real photograph, a selfie, if you will, of a Tesla launched by SpaceX in 2019 to demonstrate the strength of its Falcon Heavy rocket. This car and the mannequin is whipping around Mars as we speak. That's fantastic, and I like this picture because for me it's symbolic of how companies like SpaceX are now the driving force of space exploration. They are making money in space. Other companies are making money in space, business to business. And this has never happened before. This is new in this recent decade. It's not governments handing over lots of money to military contractors anymore. Businesses are involved, and we're going to be starting to see some real innovation. That's the most exciting thing. So let's get back to why we're doing it, because this is an important question. I think the reasons that people voice are the wrong reasons, and they don't help us whatsoever in recruiting more people to our movement. It's all this doom and gloom. We have to get off this planet. We have to be a multi-planet species or else go extinct. Even Stephen Hawking said that, right? He said we have 100 years, the physicist, the great physicist. He said we had 100 years to get off the planet Earth or face extinction. And I think this is a ludicrous idea because, when you think about it, there is nothing that can happen to the Earth that would make it less habitable than any other place in this solar system. Let's go through the top reasons that people give, like the population problem. First off, offloading 1 billion people to Mars, however impossible that would be, that's not going to hardly dent the population on Earth. And I personally don't think there are too many people on Earth. I think there's too much inefficiency. That's the real problem. You think about it, we waste half the food we grow. We waste upwards of half the electricity in these leaky electrical grids. All the trash we don't recycle, all the fertilizer we let run into the ocean. These are major engineering issues that we can overcome and then allow, with space resources, billions more people living on this planet. And I think that's a good thing. I am pro-life, pro-people in this regard. More people mean more inventors, more entrepreneurs, more ideas. That's for the betterment of society. I would love to see that, more people on Earth. The pandemic issue. I don't want to be glib here. We're in the middle of a pandemic right now. I personally know several people who have died, including a family member. But it's not an existential threat to humanity. Let's face it, a virus has never wiped out humans before, obviously. So why would that happen now all of a sudden, in this age of DNA sequencing and vaccine development? Doesn't seem to make much sense there. Nuclear war, asteroid strike, they're kind of the same thing when you think about it, some horrible bombardment from the sky. But again, not to be glib, that won't kill everyone. Even the most conservative estimates leave hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions of people, around to survive in these well-fortified underground bunkers, or even in abandoned supermarkets living off of canned beans and Spam. We're smarter than the dinosaurs. We'll see something coming and try to protect ourselves, and many will survive to continue the human race. Civilization will be set back 100 years or so. I'm not advocating for this, but it won't wipe out humans as we speak. And here's the old logic of it. If we were living on Mars in some self-sufficient way, where you don't need the Earth, If we had that technology to live on Mars that way, well, we would have the technology to detect and deflect an asteroid. End of story. Likewise with climate change, definitely real. It's the worst issue facing the Earth right now. I truly believe in the threat to life. It'll get worse before it gets better, but it'll get better. But nonetheless, if we were on Mars, same logic, if we were on Mars with the technology to be self-sufficient, obviously we would have mastered the ability to live in these mini Earths. And if we could do that on Mars, we would be doing that on Earth to save our species. If you could terraform Mars, you would terraform Earth back into Earth the way it was supposed to be. So that leaves to me only like this one possible scenario of, of what could happen, that we would have to be elsewhere in the universe. And that's, if an alien force comes by and vaporizes Earth to build an intergalactic superhighway. So yeah, kind of jokey there, but this is a real problem, because a lot of you get this issue a lot of times with members of the public coming and saying, why are we spending billions of dollars in space when we have all these problems on Earth? Well, yeah, that's why we're going into space, to solve these problems on Earth, to tap into those space resources. We're already doing that now, aren't we? With communication satellites and weather satellites, Earth monitoring satellites, so we understand how much we messed up this planet. That's important stuff. Let's keep this going. If we can access space more easily, well, we could augment energy production. We could be putting solar panels in space where there's never a cloudy day. We could even put supercomputers in space where they would operate far more efficiently in the cold of space in 40 Kelvin. We could be building these interesting molecules in zero gravity. And then we can talk about going to the moon and Mars, but it's going to be done in the context of having fun and science and exploration, not because life on Earth absolutely depends on our living on another planet. So here's the biggest problem, and everyone knows this, is getting off the Earth, right? That first 100 kilometers, it's not just a matter of going up. You got to go up and over at like a tremendous speed, 8 kilometers per second. It takes a lot of energy. That's fast, that's going from Space Telescope down to the Inner Harbor in Baltimore in a snap. Really fast. You need a lot of energy. So when you see these rockets, when you see a rocket here, you got to keep in mind that only about 2 or 5% of the mass is the actual payload, what you want to put in space. The rest, the 95+%, that's all metal and fuel to push the thing up there, and then it just disappears. That's why it's so expensive and inefficient to get things into space. Elon Musk and SpaceX, they've lowered the price considerably, and that's great. It's, to get it down much lower is an open-ended question here. There might be some incredible fuels coming down the line. We can talk about it later in the question part of this talk about the metallic hydrogen, which was isolated in the lab at Harvard. And that would have a tremendous kick. And you might be able to get down to maybe $2 a kilogram, because that's like 100 times more powerful at that point. That would be exciting if you could stabilize it, but that's a big if. Regardless, if we want to be a spacefaring people, if we want to get tens of thousands of people into space each and every day, just like we get people in the air via airplanes, we want to get that many people into space, we're going to have to get away from rockets. It's not just because they're inefficient, and it's not just because they're polluting. Think about the noise. Imagine tens of thousands of rocket launches every day. I can't believe no one's ever talking about this. The coming and going and the sonic booms, would this be maddening? We're eventually going to have to build a highway into space. So forgive me while I venture into the future here for these next couple of slides. I'll get us back to reality. So, one idea is the space elevator. And I feel that I can't see you out there, but I feel half the audience is saying, ooh, space elevator, what's that? And the other half is saying, oh, no, not the space elevator idea. So what this is, and it's fascinating. I just don't think it can work on Earth. So this is a cable, of course, that stretches into space, and you can just climb up slowly on this cable. And it's held tight, the same force if you have a ball at the end of rope and you're whipping that ball around, that rope will stay tight as long as you keep on moving it around. Well, in this case, you have a space station at the end of a cable, and you have the Earth, which is rotating. And this space station, of course, is way out there, geosynchronous orbit. Okay, that's 36,000 kilometers away. So the first problem is we don't have a cable that strong that won't snap under its own weight. Steel and Kevlar won't do it. carbon nanotubes maybe, but you need, our longest carbon nanotube is only about 1 meter long, and you're going to need 36 million of them. But the real issue is, where on earth are you going to put this thing? I mean, you would have to protect it. I mean, let's face it, you have to protect it from terrorism, right? Because some nut's going to want to bring this whole thing down. But also more menacing, you have all that space junk in low Earth orbit, and that's going to be constantly crashing into this cable, destabilizing the whole thing. So, I mean, this could work on Mars, it might work on the moon, but I just don't think it's going to work on the Earth. And that's okay. We got a nifty idea here, kind of an intermediate step. It's a space hook. So you could build this. It's exactly what it sounds like. These would be satellites with essentially cables dangling into the upper atmosphere. And you could build this with modern materials today. You don't need any fancy cabling. And essentially, you could connect cargo to that with a high altitude balloon or a high altitude airplane, and then flip it into space. Quite feasible. You could get a lot of stuff into space this way for relatively cheap once you get this infrastructure built. And that gets us to a grand idea. Again, I know it sounds really futuristic, but someday this is going to make sense. In the same way that the interstate highway system started to make sense in the 1950s. That was a $500 billion investment to connect cities for cars, but it was an investment that paid off 6 to 1 in terms of the commerce it produced. Well, likewise, with a ring around the entire planet, you know how Saturn has its ring of ice? This would be a ring of metal. You would send up tubes, maybe with the skyhooks, send up tubes one after the other, fuse them together to forms a ring around the whole planet. And then you magnetize the thing. So it's rotating at orbital velocity, and it's magnetized. It becomes a bit like a maglev rail. And at that point, you could levitate a platform above it. The platform will be still. It's the rail underneath it that's moving. It's a train in reverse a bit. And so you could stand on that platform. You would be at orbital altitude, but not orbital velocity. And you would feel the whole gravity of the Earth below you, more or less. And you could have space planes up there launching off to the moon or destinations in between Earth and moon. It sounds fantastic. It is fantastic. But at some point, this will make sense, because that'll be the way to get tens of thousands of people into space each and every day. Okay, let's snap back to reality here. The International Space Station, that's our total existence in space right now. I think there's 6 people on there right now, maybe 7. So this thing cost $150 billion to build. It costs at least $4 billion to maintain each year. It's only seen about 240 visitors. So that's like $500 million per visitor. Clearly not sustainable. You can tell by the tone of my voice that I'm not a big fan of the International Space Station. I think it's good for perhaps surprising reasons to you. I think it was an excellent way for us to team up with Russia and other nations in space. That was a major advancement beyond the engineering, just that connection to those countries. That was one of the greatest things about this International Space Station. We've also learned how to dock and maneuver in space, very important. But these experiments that they do on zero gravity, I think, are really short-sighted, in my opinion. We act as if zero gravity is in our future, when this is just a blip, a 20-year blip in humanity. Our future is in artificial gravity and the low gravity of the moon and Mars. We're not going to be traveling around everywhere in zero gravity. So we know zero gravity is bad for your health. That's all we need to know. We don't need to know how to sequence DNA in zero gravity. We don't care if ants can reproduce in zero gravity. It does nothing for our future in space, because the future is going to be in artificial gravity. So here's one of the most exciting things I have ever seen on the International Space Station, an inflatable habitat. It was put there by Bigelow Aerospace in 2015 by a SpaceX rocket, that business transaction. And it's still there today, and they use it as storage. And this is step 1. This is step 2 right here. These would be free-floating, expandable habitats. And here's Bigelow down here, and these are called his B330s, and that stands for 330 cubic meters of volume, which is more volume, livable volume, than the whole International Space Station. And he's building these for a few tens of millions of dollars, not 150 billion. And I think right now, I think you're looking at the near future of low Earth orbit. These are going to be a relatively low cost microgravity factories and microgravity laboratories and even space hotels. That was Bigelow's original intent. He plans to rent these out for $60 million a month, with a lot of money, but there's a market for this with ultra rich people and also movie producers, music video producers to film up in space. That would generate a lot of excitement. And it's the first step to these grander space resorts you may have heard about, with an external rotating gravity component and then a central microgravity for the fun of it. And you would sleep and eat out here in this civilized manner. That's the next step here. And the only drag is that the pandemic really has set him back, Bigelow. He's talking to some NASA folks right here, but he was planning to launch this within a couple of years, but he's had to lay off his entire workforce because of the pandemic. So we'll see what happens. Nevertheless, I think expandable habitats like this, which are quite inexpensive to build, are in our near future. So eventually we'll get to the moon. And I say eventually because, who knows when, but, NASA has this plan to be there, put humans back by 2024, which is, no one at NASA even, I think, was realizing that's going to happen. It was a ridiculous deadline set by the previous administration purely out of ego. But it's a bad idea too, because in my opinion, you really don't want to rush humans back to the moon. They can't really do anything there. If you want permanence on the moon, which is what China and Russia are planning, you need to set up infrastructure. And I'll get to that in a second. What I think is interesting about the moon is I predict it's going to be a lot like what we do in Antarctica. And you might know in Antarctica, no one owns Antarctica, but there are science bases down there, about 70 of them, run by dozens of countries. And you have scientists that go down there for maybe 2-3 months at a time, usually in the summer. And then you have a hardy crew that stays over winter, maybe a year or two, and then they come back. You're going to find, I think, the moon a lot like that, where you'll have nation-led bases visited by scientists going for a couple months at a time, and maybe a year-round crew, depending on how we could hold up in that microgravity of 16, 17% of Earth's gravity. Maybe it's suitable for a year. We don't know. And here's the fascinating thing, pure coincidence. The first place we're going to go, the most logical place to go, would be the south pole of the moon, because there's a constant temperature there of a minus 50 degrees Celsius, which is cold, but workable. Elsewhere on the moon, see, the moon doesn't have an atmosphere, so the temperature fluctuates so greatly because there's nothing to trap and circulate the heat. So during the lunar day, which will last 14 Earth days, sun hits the surface and it'll heat up the surface to over 120 degrees Celsius, 200 plus degrees Fahrenheit. That'll boil your blood. And then at nighttime, when there's no sun, it gets down to a minus 200 degrees Celsius. So that it's all but impossible to be working there month after month. But on the moon, the North Pole and the South Pole get that steady, shallow angle of sunlight as it's rotating. And most of the time, there's sunlight. In fact, that's what's the fun part. Some of these craters, the rims of the craters are high enough that there's actually perpetual sunlight. The sun never sets. And you could set up solar panels there for constant energy. That would be a huge boon. And then as an added bonus, you see these shadowed areas over here. These are areas with ice deposits that haven't seen the light of day for millions of years. And if you could harvest that ice, which is a big if, and we can talk about that later, it's very difficult to do, of course. But if you could harvest that ice, you would have water to drink, you would have air to breathe, because you could take away some of that oxygen from the H2O, and you would have fuel to burn, because basic rocket fuel is hydrogen and oxygen. So this is a $1 billion industry we're talking about. NASA's already put a price on it, on this ice. They will pay $500 a kilogram for the ice. That's how valuable it is to them. So what could you do on the moon when you're there? Science, lots of science, astronomy, geology, lunology, if you will, and biology. So let me get back to the ISS. And I know this is sacrilegious in some cultures here, some circles, but I think, not that anyone's listening to me, but I think we should make the moon the next ISS. I think, and we could do this with NASA's budget that it applies to the International Space Station of $4 billion a year. I think NASA could apply that budget to the moon, to function on the moon, and then hand over the International Space Station to commercial interests. This isn't surrender. This is a good thing, because they have done, NASA and its partners have done so well, learning so much about working in space. Now it's time to hand it over to the commercial the commercial people and let them further develop this, why NASA and government entities move to the moon and push the next frontier. This is really important because there's some very important biology we could be doing. Let me go up to the next slide for a second and explain, this gravity issue. I keep on harping about gravity, but we only have 2 data points when it comes to gravity. We know that 1G is good, it's healthy, it's, we guess that's what we evolved in, and 0G is bad. We know that. We knew that back from the Mir space station. But how do these 2 data points connect? Is it a linear connection? Maybe it need a little bit of gravity for relatively good health, or maybe you need a whole lot of gravity before you can have good health. We don't know. So by living on the moon and doing your experiments on the moon, you can at least add a 3rd data point to this chart, and that'll give you some indication of what Mars is going to be like. Okay, let me go back. I love this image because it shows things that are both practical and impractical. I talked about the infrastructure idea, right? So here you see, this is ESA's idea. They want, before humans even get there, they want to land and build habitats. And it will be done by, you land these things that look like these airlocks here. And then the end of the airlock, it expands into kind of an igloo type shape, okay, made of like rubbery Kevlar. And then another robot comes out and covers the thing in regolith, about 3 or 4 meters worth. You need a lot because the moon, again, doesn't have an atmosphere. So there's no protection from the cosmic radiation and the solar radiation, and even micrometeorites that are constantly hitting the moon. So you have to cover it up with a lot of regolith. And that could be done before humans even get there. You can also use some robots to start generating oxygen. The moon actually has lots of oxygen. the soil, the regolith, is 40% oxygen by weight. It's just that it's bound to other minerals like iron. But you can bake that out for your oxygen supply. And we could be doing that in advance before people get there, just to dance around and plant a flag. I have no idea why NASA wants to rush people back there. So that's the practical aspect of this. What's not practical, I mean, it makes for great space illustrations, but this idea of growing plants under glass, you see it all the time. I just said that humans had to be under 3 or 4 meters worth of regolith or let's get killed by the cosmic rays. So I just don't know how plants can survive in such radiation under glass. There's even a couple people, if you look closely enough in here, they're going to get fried by the radiation. It's ridiculous. If you're going to grow food on Mars, you're going to have to grow it under LED lights, on the moon. Okay, we talked about gravity. Here's another big thing about the moon you have to be aware of if you're going to go, and that's the dust. Not many people talk about this, but it's really menacing. It's these razor sharp particles. It's a bit like asbestos, and it's everywhere. It actually levitates a few inches above the surface of the moon in these electrostatic fountains. So just by going out and walking around, you pick up this dust. And then if you bring it back in and breathe it in, it'll rip up your lungs. It's deadly stuff, and you can't escape it. It's like living on the moon essentially be like living in an asbestos remediation zone forever. There's no getting rid of this dust. It's always going to be there. So that's a real challenge to overcome that not that many people are talking about. So keeping that in mind, I wanted to throw this out. This is kind of fun, moving about on the moon, keeping, with all the dust, these moon buggies that are kicking up dust, it probably won't be the way to go. An interesting way is with these gondolas. It would be relatively straightforward to build. You just need some poles and cables. Because the gravity is so low, they don't need much support. And because there's no air resistance, these things could fly along the cables. That would be a fun way to travel around on the moon, I think. And here's an interesting idea about where to live if we're moving away from the polar regions where the temperatures are extreme. Again, the space artists come in and they build these wonderful golden lit domes. But it would be very hard to have material that can withstand, I mean, you're essentially in Fahrenheit going like minus 250 to a positive 250 each month, 500-degree change. I mean, that's hard to maintain structure. So to get around this, we might end up living in caves. And the moon has lots of them carved out by lava. This is a real image, and it's about 100 meters deep. And just like caves on Earth, these would have a constant temperature of about minus 20 degrees, cold but workable. And you could hide down in here, build a little habitat down here. It'll give you the natural protection you need from the micrometeorites and the radiation. And maybe you can come out during the dawn or the dusk before the temperatures get too bad. That's how the Apollo astronauts, they were on the surface of the moon during either the dawn or dusk before the temperatures were too extreme. We can talk about mining, mining the moon in the question period, because it's pretty extensive, but if you're interested, it's, you need a market. That's the problem. Lots of valuable stuff on the moon, but there's no market just yet. That's the gist of it. But, actually before mining, I think tourism is a real possibility. So Baron Hilton had this idea in 1967. He was going to build a hotel on the moon, and lots of people called him a visionary. I think he might have been naive. And I think this is exemplified by his perception of Saturn by looking out the barroom window. It's not going to be that big. Maybe if you're drunk, I don't know. But this is feasible, tourism on the moon. It all comes down to the price, really. I mean, right now, it'll cost maybe $50 million to get to the moon. In fact, SpaceX wants to send 7 people around the moon for about that price. But if you could get the price down to $1 million, which I think is feasible in 10 or 15 years, if you could get the price down that low, you would have tens of thousands of people wanting to go to the moon. That's a real market. That's the beginning of an industry. And if you could get that even cheaper, you maybe in 20 or 30 years down to $100,000. Well, I think there's people on this listening to this talk right now that would do that. They would take out loans or save up for this trip of a lifetime. So I think lunar tourism is a real possibility. But I don't think this will happen. Cities on the moon, because it won't happen because there's no reason for it to happen. Just like, no one is living on Mount Everest, and no one's living in Antarctica. It's just not very practical. I mean, I'm sure 1 or 2 nuts would like to go and live there, but what would drive tens of thousands of people to form a city on the moon in this gray existence where you probably can't have children because the gravity is so low, and you can never go outside. You can't go outside on the moon. Even when you're outside, you're in a big, bulky spacesuit. So you would never be able to smell the moon or taste the moon or feel the moon or even hear the moon. There's no sound that travels. You might as well experience the whole thing in virtual reality. I can't see any reason, I mean, sure, to work on the moon, but to actually set up at your lifetime on the moon and generations on the moon, it seems to be no purpose to it. But that's not the case with Mars. There's a real possibility here because it's intriguing. Objectively, subjectively, but maybe objectively, it's far more beautiful than the moon. I mean, it has colorful sunsets and sunrises, fantastic mountains and canyons. I mean, just real color to it. And it's so Earth-like. Even the day-night cycle is about 24 hours, incredible coincidence. And it has a tilt just like Earth. So there's actually seasons, 4 different seasons on Mars. It has every element we need for life. The question of gravity is an open-ended question, of course, because if 38% of Earth's gravity, which is what Mars is If that's not enough to raise children on Mars, well, that's the end of colonization. Case closed. You can't raise kids there. You can't colonize a place. Maybe it'll be a science basis, maybe retirement community. But unless the gravity is suitable for children, then you will never be able to colonize it. But that's for later to find out. The big question now, the big issue now is how to get there, because it's a long trip. We're talking 9 months in a spacecraft. That's a long time to be out sea. No one has ever done that, actually. I looked it up with seafarers. The longest sea voyage seems to be about 3 months, and that's when Magellan was going around the whole globe, and there was a point in the Pacific between looking for islands that these guys were out in the ocean for 3 months looking for land. That's a long time, but we're talking 9 months here. And you're traveling, of course, through this soup of radiation. It's very deadly. Once you get out of the Earth's atmosphere and the protective magnetosphere of the Earth, you're a sitting duck out there. In fact, when the Apollo astronauts went to the moon, they all experienced flashes in their eyes. And what these flashes were cosmic rays going through their eyeballs and interacting with the molecules and fluorescing. And they would get this at a rate of once every few minutes. So if that's happening at that rate, you can imagine that every second, these cosmic rays are slicing through your body, ripping apart your DNA. I mean, this is like cancer waiting to happen. This is a real issue. And people are unsure whether we could actually survive the trip to Mars. You either have to get there as quickly as possible, a couple of weeks, which seems to be impossible right now, or have some serious radiation protection. And that's complicated because these cosmic rays, they're atomic bits of matter from beyond the solar system, from star explosions, moving at nearly the speed of light. They're very hard to protect yourself from. On Earth, we have a magnetosphere, and because these particles are charged, they approach our magnetosphere and then go around it. They don't go into it. But when you're on a spaceship, you don't have much protection. Now, a bit of a hope here is something called boron nitride nanotubes. This can be made into this fluffy material you see here. You can insulate the spacecraft with it, and you can even insulate your clothes with it. And boron is interesting. It's a good absorber of what we call secondary cosmic rays. So when that cosmic ray hits the whole of the spacecraft, it'll create a cascade of slightly less energetic secondary particles, sort of like shrapnel. And the boron is very good at capturing those secondary particles. So that's some hope, some protection, but it is a dicey proposition. And the other problem is the gravity. I keep on getting back to gravity. I think it's tantamount to homicide, really, to send astronauts to Mars like the plan is in zero gravity. I mean, we know what 9 months on the International Space Station is like. You lose all control of your muscles when you get back to Earth. You have to be carried out of the spacecraft. Who's going to lift you out of the spacecraft once you get to Mars for the first people to get there? So, I've been talking about this artificial gravity concept, and you might know it. It's like when you have water in a bucket, right? And if you spin that bucket over and over around your head, the water is not going to fall out as long as you keep on moving it fast enough, right? It's as if an artificial gravity is pinning the water to the bottom of the bucket. Well, that can happen in space too. And it's not that complicated to try to do this if we ever wanted to test it. Imagine a spacecraft that once it gets out into space, it separates and it remains tethered by a cable that you see here. Maybe it's not to scale, but like a kilometer or 2 kilometers long, the longer the better. And then you fire the engine so that one starts going over the other all the way to Mars. You can create an artificial gravity, Earth-like gravity, or even Mars-like gravity, or somewhere in between. You could be doing that all the way to Mars. It's an engineering feat, but it's something it can be done, and probably has to be done if we're ever going to travel through the universe, or through the solar system anyway. Okay, landing on Mars, that's a bit a dicey proposition. We saw Mars 2020 land. It was only a ton. And, that's a big nail biter. But some of these missions that we're talking about of sending humans, we're talking 20 tons. And Elon Musk wants to send these massive spacecraft that are 100 tons. We don't know how to land that on Mars without crashing. So that's why Mars is really, our destination is, 20 years down the line here. We have to figure that out before we go. But here's an idea. It may be that if we're going to send lots of people to Mars, thousands of people, the way to go maybe be with like a ferry system. These ferries that actually stay in space, that never land on Earth or Mars. In this picture, you can see the sun in the middle. And this ferry would be something that, it'll take you closer to Mars and then closer to Earth, closer to Mars and closer to Earth, around and around again. So when that ferry comes, you catch it, you jump up with a shuttle and get onto that ferry. And then in this trajectory, you can get to Mars in about 5 months, which is, the fastest yet, right? And then you kind of hop off light. You're not with a big spacecraft. You can throw your cargo down there. It doesn't matter if that crashes and burns, but you get off as lightly as possible and get down to Mars. And then without any people, the shuttle returns. At this point, the planets are farther apart, so it's going to be about 1.5 years to get back. But when it gets back every 2 years, more people can get on the ferry or 2 ferries. That might be the way to go. Okay, so now here's the problem with Mars. It's beautiful. That's a big problem. Looks like Arizona. It's so beautiful that it looks easy. And it's not easy to live there. It's not something you can conquer so easily. There are 2 problems with this, this photograph. One is our old friend, plants under glass, but for slightly different reasons. The sunlight is powerful enough. It's like the angle of the sun in Scandinavia once you're on Mars, but it's the dust storms that's a real problem. The dust storms on Mars block out the sun for weeks or months at a time. It's such a problem that actually solar panels are not reliable. You have to have a backup energy source on Mars because the sun will blot out the sun. I mean, the dust will blot out the sun. It's that simple. So if you can't rely on solar panels, you can't rely on photosynthesis. If you want food, you're going to have to grow it under LEDs. The other problem is this guy over here in this spacesuit that looks pretty comfortable. It's kind of form-fitting. You can even see his butt a little bit, and it looks like he's just out there for a hike. Looks pretty cool, but it's not going to be that way, unfortunately. Here's another spacesuit. This is an engineer at MIT. Deva, can't remember her last name. She's been trying to get a more comfortable spacesuit, and it looks great. It was built by an Italian design firm, but it's really not that practical. Because you have to remember the atmospheric pressure on Mars is only 6 millibars, which is pretty close to the moon's 0 millibars and not even close to the Earth's 1,000 millibar of pressure. So our spacesuits on Mars are probably going to look like a lot like we have on the moon, these big bulky things where it's hard to grab everything. And that's a shame. That's a big problem we would have to overcome. Otherwise, it's not going to be much fun to be on Mars in those big bulky things. And the same radiation problem really on the moon with your habitats. You might not have to be covered with regolith though. Actually, because Mars has water, you could use the Martian water to fill a membrane and use the water as the protection. Water actually protects better, per volume than the regolith because it's denser. So that would be a good way to protect yourself, but it will be somewhat of a translucent existence looking out. My idea, again, not that anyone's listening to me, but I think you should build a habitat into the side of a mountain, like the northern slope on the northern hemisphere. That way, the mountain would block out 100% of the solar radiation, and Mars itself would be protecting from the cosmic rays coming from all different angles except for the front. But this way you could have a big, nice window so you can see beautiful Mars. That's a huge psychological lift. Imagine going all the way to Mars and living underground or in some translucent world. Because you can't go outside that often because of the radiation. So you need a real psychological lift to be there. This is what Earth looks like from Mars. So it's pretty lonely. when you're on Mars. Here's another kind of psychological left, generating oxygen. There's an instrument on Mars now called MOXIE. That was just there with the Mars 2020 rover. And that's going to generate oxygen by pulling in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and producing oxygen from that, the O in the carbon dioxide. And that's probably our main way to generate oxygen on Mars. But here's a complement to that. This is being built by the University of Arizona. I went out to visit them when I was writing my book. And this is lightweight, it's expandable, and it's made of aluminum. And using LEDs, they are growing and harvesting 1,000 kilocalories of food every day, and more importantly, generating 100% of an adult's oxygen needs. So that would be pretty cool that everyone on Mars gets one of these things. I like to say you can have your air and eat it too. Because farming is going to be difficult. Here's Mark Watney from the movie The Martian. Great movie, great book. I'm not ripping it apart. Sensational book. But there are two things wrong with this picture. One is a bit of a nitpick, I'll tell you the truth, because I grow potatoes. He probably wouldn't be able to do it under these artificial lights that he has. They're not strong enough. Probably be able to grow the greens, but not the big tubers that he has. Again, a nitpick. But the real issue is that the soil is toxic, unfortunately, that it contains perchlorates. So the potato growing in it would absorb the perchlorates, and Watney eating those potatoes would probably die after a couple months of eating all those perchlorates. So if you're going to farm directly into the regolith, you're going to have to clear out those perchlorates somehow, which is feasible, but when you're talking about acres of farmland, it'll be very tedious. So probably best to grow hydroponically, aquaponically on Mars. But to tell you the truth, everything's going to be difficult on Mars. That's why it's so far away, 20, 30 years before we get there. Major advancements we need on all types of aspects we can talk about later. But here's an end game for some, like Elon Musk, to have thousands of people on Mars. Definitely feasible from an engineering point of view. Definitely feasible from an emotional point of view. I can see people wanting to do this. I would want to go there. Absolutely. It's the economic issue. Is this feasible from an economic point of view? Because what you see here, these thousands of people, when you think about it, they're a bunch of moochers, aren't they? What are they giving back to Earth? What you're seeing here is trillions of dollars in one-way investment. This is a migration like never before, as I was saying. This is not old world, new world scenario where the new world can send back timber and fur and fish and have some real trade going on. Mars really has very little of value aside from some novelty goods to trade back. So this is pure one-way investment funded by, I guess, Earth taxpayers for trillions of dollars. And how are we going to tolerate that just to send a few thousand lucky people to Mars for what? A grand human experiment? That sounds nice, but how practical is it? I have to be honest. But let's put some numbers on this. This idea of when to go comes from Freeman Tyson, a physicist who just died a few years ago. So he figured, between Columbus and the Mayflower, that first big voyage and then the migration, 128 years passed. And a lot of shipping technology happened during that period. Well, if you view Sputnik as kind of that first voyage, and you add 128 years to that, we're talking about maybe colonists, maybe people can go there by 2085. That's curiously an interesting date. Maybe that would be the target date where migration could take place on Mars if the gravity permits it. But now think about the cost, though. That Mayflower voyage cost about 7.5 years worth of wages. And right now to get to Mars, you're talking about $10,000 worth of wages. So you're going to have to get that cost way down. If we could get Mars down to a voyage down to $1 million, about 10 years worth of wages, maybe you could have migration going on, but it's going to come down to the money. That's the economic, that's the reality of it, isn't it? Okay, people ask me about terraforming Mars, and it's difficult. And we can talk about that in the question and answers. It's not science fiction, but the the main way to do this, of course, is to liberate all that carbon, dry ice, that carbon dioxide underneath the foot, get it up into the sky for an atmosphere, but there's just not enough of it. And you're going to have an atmosphere that's only about 100 millibar. That's still not suitable for any kind of higher level life. So you'll never be able to run around naked on Mars, which of course would be my goal. And that's a real bummer. At that point, it becomes science fiction to import volatiles, import nitrogen from Uranus and all that stuff, and skim an asteroid over the top of the atmosphere to liberate stuff. Good luck with that. So it's a shame, but it's worth trying, because every bit of millibar will help foster some kind of life that could grow naturally on Mars. I'm all for it. But that's it, my friends. That's Mars with its relatively high gravity. The only thing that comes close to it is Mercury with 38% gravity, similar to Mars. And you could live on that. It's the hottest planet in the universe, but the part that's not facing the sun is the coldest. And there's a line in between that if you could stay there as it's rotating, you could stay in a dawn or a dusk, you could live on Mercury. Why? I don't know, but you can. And Venus, you could actually live comfortably on Venus above the atmosphere in the temperature, pressure, and gravity similar to the Earth. It's the most comfortable place in the solar system around a planet. But again, why would you do this? It's actually not an accurate picture here from NASA, because you'd probably be in the clouds, so you wouldn't be able to see above and below you. It's kind of a pretty poor existence. You could live inside an asteroid. Some of these things are the size of a mountain, and you could carve that out and have a rotating habitat inside there. And with a kick, with some fusion fuel, you could kick yourself off and travel to Alpha Centauri at 10% light speed. So you could technically get there in 40 years. That's a generation. That's a lifetime. That's pretty exciting. We can talk about that in the question and answers. But every place else, it just gets harder and harder with radiation and extreme cold. Actually, it'd be fun to look for life out there, especially on Enceladus. Because I think that's the real place that might have life, because not only is there that subsurface ocean, but there are geothermic vents that could actually provide food for any microorganisms that are there. So I can find a way to live on any of these planets. Some people actually want to live on Titan because it's kind of an atmosphere. It's the only place in the universe, solar system, that has an atmosphere like Earth's. So you don't need a pressure suit, hooray. But you need a parka, pretty thick parka, because you're talking about 100 minus 180. Pluto and Charon, you could, actually link those two together, because they always have the same face to each other. That would be fun to do. But all these crazy grand ideas, they don't make much sense because of something that Isaac Asimov came up with, this idea of terrestrial chauvinism. Why would we live on these rocks? Why do we have to live on a rock? Why wouldn't we live in an orbiting habitat that has artificial gravity and climate control? That's the logical thing we're going to be doing. Look at this place. It has patio furniture, for Christ's sake. Would you rather live here than on some ice hut on Jupiter's moon, Europa? I mean, it's far more comfortable. And then if you're living in these kind of units, you could go down to the planets and the moons you want to explore for a few days and then get back to comfort. This is what I think is in our future. We're going to have science bases on the moon. We're going to have possible colonies on Mars if the gravity permits it. But other than that, I think we're going to be in orbiting habitats so that it would enable us to go to the more rugged places for a few days at a time, but not actually live in those places, again, in the same way we don't choose to live on Mount Everest. And my last point is, why would we want to do this? So I see two futures in front of us here. And one is this idea that there's no space activity, that we listen to these people and say, why do we spend billions of dollars in space? So if there's no more space activity, then this is a world of finite resources, and that every person born in another country, that's your enemy. That's a person who's going to steal your resources away. And there's lots of people out there. There are people in these countries, of course, they want to drive. They want to have cars. They want to have iPhones. They want to have these materials. And there's going to be a constant fight over these kind of resources that produce these things. That's one kind of future. The other future is this daily access to space, to tap in to the infinite resources. And if we could do that, that means every person born on this planet is a resource himself or herself, that they can contribute to this wealth of knowledge to make life better. So that's why I'm in favor of space exploration, to make life on Earth better for all of us. So that's it. Thank you for your time. Let me stop sharing. Frank gave me instructions to say stop sharing.
Fantastic. Oh, thank you. You brought up a tremendous number of points. I really liked your comments in the beginning that were sort of taking the manifest destiny type idea of why we would go out to space rather than because it's absolutely necessary to save life on Earth. And then you sort of finished it with the same counterpoint to it that, if we do go out there, if it's to make our lives better, would be one of the ways that we would do that. One of the reasons for doing it. So I want to actually ask a question about one of the points you made partial way through, in that colonization. When countries colonized here on Earth, was driven by access to raw materials that could be shipped back home. And the strongest argument people usually make is about asteroid mining, which you didn't mention. What do you think of that in terms of a way of getting raw materials?
I think it's wonderful, and it all comes down to the price of access to these objects. And so, if we could do that, and if we could mine space and we wouldn't have to mine on Earth. I mean, mining is so important, but it has incredible environmental costs. Let's face it, especially things like uranium and cobalt and these rare earth minerals that aren't particularly rare, but they're just so hard to get from the Earth, and they cause incredible damage. If we could get them cheaply from space, that would just be a wonderful resource, and we could allow people in an ironic kind of way to live primitively, because what we're doing is we're just tearing up the rainforests. We're tearing up places where indigenous people live, just to get those resources. This was just in the news today about Greenland. This beautiful Greenland is getting torn up by this uranium mine, and it's jobs, but it's ruining Greenland. If we could get these materials from space, we could allow people to live like they've always lived for thousands of years, but still have the resources we need to live a modern life. It would be like this balance between primitivism and modernism, but it's all about the cost to get to these rocks in space or the moon.
Yeah, there are plenty of philosophical arguments for the things, but the economics really ends up trumping all. So we're going to bring in Grant Justice. Grant has been monitoring the chat. I've been looking at the chat a bit myself, and we've had a ton of conversation about a lot of things. Somebody goes, "Oh, wait a minute, isn't Mars soil toxic?" And then 3 minutes later, boom, you bring up the point, Mars soil is toxic. So Grant, have you found some good questions in our chat here today?
Absolutely. The chat, like you said, has been popping off today. So you touched on it a little bit, but the chat definitely wants you to elaborate a little more on your thoughts on SpaceX and private industry and space exploration, kind of bringing it back to our economics point you just made.
Absolutely. It's a real exciting time. I think that it's basic economics. The more competition you have, the lower this price can be. And it's nice to see all types of niches getting filled in. I didn't mention anything about Rocket Lab down in New Zealand. This is a company, New Zealand doesn't even have a space program, and yet they have a company launching these simple rockets. They're going small, and they're launching a rocket for about $5 million. You could buy that rocket, and people can team up and put their nanosat experiments in there, these lightweight things, and get that into space. That's one very profitable thing. And that can build a bit of an infrastructure of miniature communication satellites and things like that. It all adds up. And what SpaceX is doing with the big stuff, and other companies are competing finally to get a lunar lander. That kind of competition is thrilling to see, because it's just been so lazy, with governments handing it over to military contractors, and there was no incentive to innovate, no incentive to save money. And it was so much has been wasted over the years. But now, because of this economic competition, you're finally seeing some real innovation to make space more affordable.
All right. Thank you. And yeah, absolutely. I think competition, I mean, it's at the heart of human nature. We got to harness it for the right reasons, for the right things. Second up, and this interested me a little bit as well, because it's something I hadn't necessarily thought about before. What about aquaponics and building on that, using water as some sort of a non-permeable solution for blocking solar radiation?
Yeah, no, I thought about that too. I think aquaponics is the most efficient of all the growing systems. And for people who don't know, you have the hydroponic system where you're growing plants in some nutrient-rich water, right? Well, the aquaponics brings in this full cycle idea where you have fish that you feed. The fish produce, they eat the food, they produce waste, nitrogen-rich waste that gets filtered through some rocks and bacteria to turn the, I believe it's nitrates into nitrites into nitrates, or traits into trites, I'm not quite sure. But they break it down, that nitrogen, into stuff that the plants can use, and the plants absorb that, and then they feed the fish. So it's a cycle that goes around, and it's very efficient. You could be eating the fish, raising and eating the fish, and raising and eating the plants. Now you're bringing in this extra element of, could you use that water as radiation protection? And that's pretty cool, isn't it? If it's all around you, right? And that would definitely work for you, but would it work for the fish? Because they're swimming around in this radiated water. So it might be a little hard to pull off, but it's very cool. And water is an excellent insulator.
I mean, if I have to live on another planet, underground or something, at least like Sea Lab or like underwater complex, like at least give me something,
Exactly.
Well, yeah,
I mean, that's a huge psychological lift. So, my previous book was called Food at Work. It's kind of academic. It's about how to feed workers. And that was important in Antarctica because they were getting a lot of frozen food, and there's not much crunch to the frozen food. So they actually started building greenhouses in Antarctica. And that was a huge psychological lift, because during the winter, in the summer, you could get airplanes in there. In the winter, actually, you can't get planes in there, so to the South Pole. So they were growing fresh food on the South Pole, fresh lettuce, and it has that crunch. And it was a huge psychological lift for these people there. And I think it's going to be very important on Mars, and to have fish, to have life. One other thing you didn't mention is, it is curious, you don't know how bees and certain insects could navigate on Mars without a magnetic field and a North Pole. So it's unclear whether they could fly around and find their direction. So that's why I said agriculture will be challenging, but the more animals you can get there, the more greater the humans will feel.
Yeah, that was one of the comments, was that the lack of a magnetosphere on Mars will change, will have several implications like that for the radiation as well. Yeah, the navigational of birds and bees and everything.
Yeah, you would have to maybe hand pollinate things. It's going to be small scale. Maybe the bees can adapt. We don't know. If it's in a small confinement, maybe they can find their way around that way. It's an unknown. Exciting.
Yeah, I would just comment that none of the pictures of living on the moon that I ever saw when I was growing up had them living in caves. So,
oh yeah.
it's one of those unfortunate realities that comes across. All right, what's our next question, Grant?
All right. Next up is someone wanted to know your opinion on AI and using artificial intelligence in the expansion of humanity to take over a lot of the clerical, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Um, I don't know how to narrow in on that question, but I can say a few things. I always thought it was funny when we talk about living in space and what are these people, what are we going to do out there? And it always comes down to farming and mining, you know, the two oldest professions. That's what we're going to do in the future, farm and mine, when it's probably going to be done robotically with robots, rather intelligent robots. That's one form of AI that's definitely going to be needed. And I was mentioning that on Mars because, you know, with the rover, right, it's just inches along and you're afraid to move it too fast because if it crashes, you're screwed. And Mars is pretty open. It's not like it's going to crash into a tree, right? So, you know, if we really need better AI. I know it's rocks and things like that, but if it can think for itself better, then these things can move around more easily without human interaction. So there's major advancements to be had there with AI to do things for us outdoors when we're on these planets, because we're not going to be able to be outdoors very often because of the radiation.
Right. And, you know, when we've got just one rover on Mars, you can't take any chances with the AI. But if you had 100 of them on, well, you could take a bit more chances with it. And, you know, if you lost one, okay, fine, you learn things. We are, of course, practicing that with our self-driving cars and everything. But yeah, it's going to take decades, quite some time.
That's true. I've heard plans of having many ones going out and all, like, you know, like you just said, 100 little guys going out and doing all types of things. If you lose one, it's not too bad.
All right, next question. We can't hear you, Grant.
I'm back. Next up, we've got one. What kind of energy production is known on Mars? Is there anything that we can use as fuel without necessarily bringing it ourselves? How do you really see that working there? Because you mentioned some sort of an issue with solar panels, you know, light collection.
That's right. There will be solar. There is uranium and things. You could do nuclear on Mars. I think I don't have the chemistry down completely, but when you're converting carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, maybe Frank knows this, into oxygen, you're going to be producing carbon monoxide in that process. And that could be a bit of a fuel too. There's also the possibility of adding hydrogen to this. Mars doesn't have much free hydrogen. It's in the water and such. But if you add hydrogen into the mix, then you could be making methane. In fact, that was Robert Zubrin's brilliant idea of sending a lander to start, and with some hydrogen, to start turning carbon dioxide into air, water, and methane, and then storing up that methane as rocket fuel to blast off Mars. So you wouldn't have to bring a shipment of fuel to get off Mars. So definitely methane is the most probable gas, I think.
Okay.
That's probably not a common problem people think of, is not necessarily getting there, but getting back or getting things off of Mars once you're already there.
Yeah, and I like to think of Mars as having everything we need, but just in forms that we're not ready to use. So we have to manipulate a few things for us to do what we want to do.
So in terms of that, in one section of your talk, you sort of implied that what we've learned from ISS is sort of a practice that will help us do the moon. Do you also feel that doing the moon would provide sufficient practice for then going to Mars? Is it a requisite to do moon before Mars?
Yeah, I'm one of those believers. I really think we have to be on the moon. It's kind of the same thing. It's a dress rehearsal for Mars, to tell you the truth. I mean, you essentially need the same type of radiation protection, the same type of oxygen supply, the same type of water supply. Everything's the same in my opinion. And of course, the moon is 3 days away. could be even faster if you could send a, a rocket there and crash into it if you wanted to get there in 8 hours or so, right? The Pluto Express passed the moon in just about 8 hours. So, I mean, you could get to the moon rather quickly, and you could vacate people rather quickly. In a funny way, it might be easier to get to the moon than to Antarctica in the winter. It's very treacherous to get there to the South Pole, in particular, in the middle of the winter. They don't even try it. But the moon is someplace you could probably access year round with less of an issue, as long as you have a rocket ready to go.
All right. Next question.
That's all we've got from the chat so far.
That's all we've got from the chat bar. Let me check my notes that I made during the talk. Yeah, all right. So you mentioned a lot of these zero gravity repercussions that we've learned from the ISS. And that would be, slightly ameliorated on the moon with, 1/6 gravity, 16%, and then a little bit more on Mars with 38% gravity. We talked about creating artificial gravity in space as we're flying there, as we're traveling there. I get it. If 38% gravity isn't enough for reproduction or anything, or for kids and such, is there any alternative that it just bases around it, maybe, as you were talking about?
Yeah, I really don't see it. I mean, people talk about these, a tilt-a-wheel on the surface of Mars or something like that. I mean, that's incredible engineering. I mean, it's just not logical. I like to think in my book, Spacefarers, I just talk about the logical scenario of what would probably happen. And if you have one set of technology, you would probably do something similar that's easier, and it would probably be in the rotating habitat above Mars, and then venture down there. It would be easier than building some type of artificial gravity system on a surface of a planet. And the gravity is a big assumption. That's why I was trying to point out those 2 data points. I don't think we can make any assumption about how those lines are connected. Wouldn't it be curious whether maybe you only need 10% of gravity? Maybe, when you think about minerals and mining or stuff, it's impossible to mine in zero gravity because nothing is settling. But, on asteroids or the moon, things eventually settle regardless of the amount of gravity. And so maybe human health is possible with just a little bit of gravity. I mean, it's pure speculation, and you just have to test it. It's a shame there was a proposed mission, I think it's called Mouse Hab, where you would send mice into space cared for by a robot, right? It's a real mission, and it seems quite practical. And it would have rotating gravity, artificial gravity, and it could have 50% and 30% and 10%. You could test it and see how the mice do going about their life. It's just a matter of feeding them and taking care of their cages. Not that complicated for a robot to do. And then you could really test what it would be like to see if they can reproduce and raise their young.
Be interesting to see the DNA changes.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'd almost want to make that a return mission so that you could do the tests afterwards, right? All right. Well,
yeah. I've got a good one to end us on.
Okay.
If I may.
All right, go for it.
All right. I want to get this one. Okay. Does the exploration of deep ocean play a role in space exploration? How do you think it might affect moving forward?
I don't know. I haven't thought about that. I know there's legal issues of who owns the deep oceans and what you're allowed to take from there, and what nations can benefit from that. And that's going to come up with the moon, of who owns the moon and who's allowed to have these resources, who's allowed to dig at that ice and take it away from other people. So I've seen that kind of issue come up with the deep ocean. And so there might be something to learn from there. Other than that, I don't know. I know there's this kind of a science fiction genre of living under under the ocean as a way to, make more room for people on the land. But one thing it always gets glossed over is the fact that if you kind of have an area that you're living under, it'll probably be, consumed by algae. Is this all going to be covered with gunk, in a couple of weeks? And like every day you would have to go out there and clean your beautiful golden lit dome underneath the ocean. But I haven't really
don't
thought
like the
deeply about
domes.
deep space.
Really not a fan of domes, I'm getting thus far.
I mean, you got barnacles, you got to deal with them, right?
That's fair. That's fair.
I mean, you got to be, I start off my book, Spacefarers, with talking about the space animators because they make it look so easy, but it's really not that easy. Of course, they want to make it look easy. Everything just works perfectly and everything's clean, but the reality is really difficult.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. You've given our audience a tremendous number of things to think about. I hope that they will go out and take a look at your book and think of them, think through even more. Next month, May 4th, we have the Finding the Music of the Spheres, Hearing Stars from the Consonance Collective and the Bergamo Quartet from the Peabody Institute. It's going to be a special one, probably going to run a little long. Won't be limited to our 90 minutes here. And thank you so much, Chris. Really great to have you here. And we'll see you next month, everyone.
Thank you. It was a